Finding an activity to do with your child that challenges and pushes you both to be better, that builds character, and is something you can learn together is a fantastic thing.
At Okami Martial Arts and Fitness, we thrive on positive feedback from our students, so you can just imagine how happy we were to hear from Jessica and her daughters as they gave their thoughts about our classes.
Classes are always fun, and I always learn something new.
Fun and learning, all while getting out and getting active. That's one of our goals, and according to these amazing ladies, we're doing our job and doing it well.
I see the excitement and the joy that they have to go to class to learn and improve.
Contact us today to find out what everyone is talking about. Our family can't wait to meet your family.
Okami is my favorite place to be.
Okami Martial Arts and Fitness. Check us out at okamikai.com.
Everything is my favorite thing to do in class.
Welcome to the Okami Chronicles. I'm Scott Campsell, and I'm the Chief Instructor at Okami Martial Arts and Fitness, which is located in Uxbridge, Ontario, Canada. Today's episode is a special one because we're talking with someone who has had a massive impact on how martial arts schools around the world teach, communicate, and connect with children. Melody Johnson is the founder and CEO of SKILLZ Worldwide, a global system that combines martial arts training with cutting-edge child psychology, neuroscience, and age-specific learning. This episode is for anyone who works with children, and especially for parents who want to understand the why behind their child's behavior. Okami is a traditional martial arts school, but what makes us effective with kids isn't just the techniques, it's the way we teach them. Over the years, we've adopted many tools from SKILLZ to help our students learn faster, behave better, and grow more confident both on and off the mats. We haven't become a SKILLZ branded school, but we found a really successful gray area where traditional martial arts discipline meets modern child development science. Now, I want to point something out. Melody didn't have to do this interview. She did it for free out of a genuine passion for helping instructors, parents, and children. And you can hear that passion come through every minute of our talk. She's not just a business person running a program. She's someone who deeply understands how children learn, grow, and thrive. You'll hear her explain what makes SKILLZ so effective and how those same principles can be used to teach anything, whether it's martial arts, football, or even just getting your child to follow directions at home. This episode is going to give you new insight into how children think and learn, and maybe even how we as adults can teach them a little better. This has been a long time coming. I think 2019, somehow I found you. And so I'm really happy. I can't express it. And I'd said off air that I feel like I'm fanboying a bit, but both my wife and I have used your programs and we've used your words and your methods. So it's really nice to be able to actually have a conversation with you. We were supposed to go to the Super Show in 2020 and then COVID happened. Like I said, it's been a long time coming. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to engaging in a conversation with you. And yeah, what a bummer 2020 with the Super Show. And then they only had one other event. I wish they were still going on.
Let's get into a little bit about you and SKILLZ. What first inspired you to create SKILLZ?
I grew up as what would be considered a dungeon dojo martial arts student. So I trained in martial arts starting in the mid 80s, and it was very traditional. Kids and adults trained side by side. And at first I didn't like it until I started sparring and kicking boys in the head and getting points and winning trophies for it. And then I thought it was the coolest sport ever. But moving forward in my high school years, we had moved from New Orleans, Louisiana to Florida, in Orlando, and martial arts wasn't very cool in the early 90s. The kids' martial arts still didn't really hit its peak until the Power Rangers came out. But by then I had already left the martial arts and somehow worked my way through. It's a long story, but I worked my way through getting a job at Disney World, working at Magic Kingdom Entertainment. And let's just say that I was really good friends with Mickey Mouse. And through that experience, I learned a lot about entertaining children and how excited children are through this imaginary type of environment that Disney really projected in theme parks. So when I ended up getting back into martial arts, and when I started teaching, just by nature from my experience and training with Disney, I spent a lot more time when I would teach them on the mat, entertaining them more as kids started coming into the martial arts because they loved the Power Rangers. And it was a lot of fun. Kids were having a blast. But the challenge was we were getting a lot of kickback from traditional martial arts parents who were in traditional martial arts who now watch this play-based classes going on with their kids and were saying, my kids are having fun but they're not learning real martial arts. But our classes were packed. And it started making me realize that if there's a way that we can entertain the kids and make sure that they're having fun while also building skill sets that help set them up for martial arts, I think that that's the way to go. And that's when it started to click, as I started to realize that most martial arts have this concept of you train in sparring, you train in forms, you train in self-defense, and through that training, you develop skills. And kids don't necessarily have that cognitive fortitude to develop those skills. So I said, what if we did an reverse training concept? What if we identified skills that they need to have in order to be good martial arts practitioners, or actually just the best version of themselves in general, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially, identify those skill sets and then plug martial arts into that? Would this work? And that's really how SKILLZ was born. And now it's become such a global phenomenon in the martial arts industry, in the sense of when parents see us doing all of this fun entertainment, but they're also watch them develop into these good martial artists. They're saying, what is happening here? And it's that skills concept. They're developing the focus, they're developing the discipline, they're developing the balance through martial arts, plugging it in as the vehicle, not necessarily saying you're going to take martial arts and build these skills.
SKILLZ, we should sort of explain this. This isn't just one program. You've got a bunch of programs under a SKILLZ umbrella. Like you've got basic skills, and you've sort of divided them up into different age groups. So what was the turning point where you realized that had to happen?
I wrote a preschool martial arts program in the mid-90s, and it was definitely play-based. It stemmed from me going to Korea and teaching in a class full of a bunch of preschool age kids, which I didn't really teach prior to that. We had a preschool program. It wasn't very successful, mostly because our expectations were so high for them. And then when I went over to Korea and I taught this class, and it was more play-based because they didn't speak English, my instructor came over and said, do you see how many parents and how many kids are watching you play with these kids? They're having a great time. So I said, great. So I brought this concept back to my school and said, listen, I'm going to open up this 6 and under martial arts class, and it's going to be play-based because we're turning down kids right and left, and let's see how it works. It blew up in a sense of lots of kids loved it. They were signing up, but I was getting those parents who said, all right, but you're glorified babysitting. You're not really helping my child. So then I was trying to look at it, but this particular game, they're developing balance. This particular game, they're developing control. This game, they're developing focus. And that's when it started to hit me. If I can explain to the parents the skills that their child is developing through this fun martial arts training, will they embrace it? And they did, because the results were so measurable and so progressive in the sense of, basically, I guess I need to tee it up. So SKILLZ is basically the idea of, in every different category. So like, for example, preschoolers, early elementary schoolers, middle schoolers, there's 8 different skills that you identify, the primary skills. And out of those, 2 are going to be their strengths, 2 are going to be areas where they have the most room for growth, and 4 are going to meet in the middle. And every kid is very different. The problem prior to that is that martial arts was so cookie cutter. You had to be really good at these specific skill sets in order to succeed in martial arts. What SKILLZ did is it broke down 8, and it enabled every single child to succeed. And it didn't matter whether their strengths were in this area or that area. There was 8 of them, so they can fit and they can shine in certain categories. And when that started working really well, I put together this program called Little Ninjas and said, listen, if you have a martial arts school, these are the 8 skills that they need to develop: focus, teamwork, control, memory, balance, discipline, fitness, and coordination. And if you can teach them all 8 skills systematically, and as they go through the ranks, they get better at each skill. By the time they graduate that program, they are above their stage of development in their focus. They're above their stage of development in their teamwork, above their stage of development in control, memory, balance, and so forth. Then what happens is they go into your regular martial arts program fully equipped with the skill sets to then thrive. And a company called the National Association of Professional Martial Artists found out about it, John Graydon, and he presented it to the industry. And within a couple of years, it was working so well in martial arts schools that so many people were saying, I was turning kids away in that age group. Now, not only am I piling in those particular classes, but they are moving into the regular kids program, the 7 and up, so much more developed than those 7-year-olds who jump in, that it's becoming the foundation of our martial arts school. And then from there, I had martial arts school owners going, well, can you do it now for the older kids? And can you do it for our elementary? Can you do it for our middle schoolers? And it just kind of grew into this concept of anything, any category. For example, parenting. I created a parent skills program. There's 8 different skill sets. And if you work on all 8 of these skill sets, you're going to be there's no such thing as a perfect parent, but you'll become a better parent. Same thing with confidence, same thing with emotional intelligence, and so forth.
You're talking about a bunch of different ways of getting things across to parents, to kids, but your whole system is really science-based. And that was the thing that really drew me towards looking at this for our program as well. So can you explain a little bit about that?
When I first built my little ninja program, I was trying to study child development and leadership and find different resources that would help me run better instructor training for those who were interested in the program. But there wasn't a lot out there for understanding child development or leadership when it came to kids. We're talking about the mid 90s, so we really didn't have the internet yet. So any way that we were going to acquire resources, either you need to A, go to the library and go through books and books and books, or B, you had to do on-site studies. You had to go to T-ball and dance classes and speak with child therapists and try to do as much intensive research as you possibly can. And throughout that research, I came across a corporate psychiatrist. His name was Dr. Douglas McGregor, and he was a corporate psychiatrist out of MIT in the 1950s. And I read a book that he wrote that talked about corporate leadership and these 2 different theories on how corporate leaders lead their team. And there's the theory X mindset and there's a theory Y mindset. And corporate leaders who ran their companies with this theory X mindset believed that employees needed to be threatened, coerced, punished, held accountable in order to perform at very high levels in their company. So basically, if you don't get that report to me by Friday, you don't get your bonus. If you don't meet your quota by the end of the month, you don't get that promotion. If you keep missing your quota, then you're going to lose your job. And basically said that that's how he needed to utilize their leadership to get their team members to perform at high levels. But he also said that there's also these theory Y leaders that also were running companies that had the opposite. If you get your report to me by Friday, you'll get your bonus. If you meet your quota, you'll get a promotion. If you continue to meet your quota, you're going to have job security. Same goal, different approach. And based on those studies, the theory X, the using threats, coercion, and punishment, which is basically behavior by fear, they had, number 1, low employee morale. Number 2, higher employee turnover. Employees were quitting, they weren't excited. And then number 3, they were limited in how well the company would grow. But also, those employees who left the company went on to believe that they were not very good at their roles. So they would either switch careers or just stop altogether. At the exact same time, in the case studies, the theory Y corporate leaders found that they were, number 1, there was high employee morale. Number 2, those employees were sticking around a lot longer. Number 3, they were breaking records in the corporate margins. And number 4, they had a passion for their jobs. And when I read this book, I said, that's martial arts instructors to a T in our generation. We went to instructor certifications and we had timeout zones. So basically, if a kid didn't sit still, it was, you're going to timeout. If you keep not sitting still, you're going to get push-ups. That same theory X mindset. Whereas I started to shift my mindset and say, what if we can adopt the same theory Y mindset that Dr. Douglas McGregor adopted and say, listen, can you show me how a black belt sits? And you demonstrate for everybody else. And then they demonstrate, and then everybody else sits just like this kid who now you've prompted to demonstrate in a good way. And everybody claps and cheers. Now, sitting still is attached to a fun behavior, a behavior by desire, because there's this positive attention to it. And that's really how the idea of integrating child psychology into martial arts came about, because it wasn't relevant. It wasn't important to most martial arts instructors back in the day. We just kind of felt like it needed to be militaristic, hardcore threats, coercion, and punishment. It was effective, but at what cost? Lower student morale, higher student turnover, limited margins in your school, where a theory Y approach to working with children was just as effective. You were accomplishing the same goals, getting the kids to pay attention, sit still, have good discipline. But the cost now was higher student morale, higher student retention, and higher margins as far as the growth went in martial arts schools.
We use a lot of your strategies and we kept our own brand. I still consider us to be a baby in the martial arts world. We've been running 26 years, but quite frankly, like I trained at a school that's been running 53, and I know there's older schools than them. And so there's still a loyalty to, like, when you've created a logo, you've created your name and everything. So can you see, even if a school didn't want to become a skills school, is there a benefit for a traditional martial arts school to still incorporate your programs? Like, I can see it, but do you see that?
Absolutely. So I had a person who runs and owns and operates a global fitness franchise who came to me and said, skills should be a franchise. The way that you've set up the positioning and the branding, martial arts schools, if they do skills, they have to change their name and logo and use the trade dress, everything the way that you were doing. And I went up to his corporate headquarters. We had a long, intensive conversation, and I knew it wasn't the right fit for our martial arts industry, exactly for what you were saying right now. So for schools who don't want to change their brand and their logo, it didn't make sense to try to force them out of their traditions, because I have a deep respect for traditional martial arts. You and I, prior to the recording of this, we talked about it. I'm a traditional martial artist. I grew up in the dungeon dojo days, and I embraced that. I just knew that it wasn't the best way to scale your martial arts business. And we talked about this. It's not money motivation. It is, how many students can we reach out to? How many kids can we connect with and not only get them to enjoy martial arts, but reap all the benefits that the martial arts has to offer and then stick with it? So you can be a traditional martial arts school and not rebrand everything skills. You can just use the science and psychology of the drills and the curriculum and the instructor training. We dive into the science and psychology of how you speak to children matters. And we all have the same goal as martial arts instructors. We want children to be the best versions of themselves, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially. But how we approach that matters. And there's two different ways that you can approach it. And of course, it's on the spectrum. You can use it through threat, coercion, and punishment, which is very militaristic, but there's a high cost to that approach that doesn't meet a very large market. So for those schools who want to target and reach as many children as they can, the theory Y approaches, the skills theories and concepts, those are the ones that are getting the best results. And again, you don't need to have the skills logo or the skills ninja to do that.
That all being said, this podcast is very insular. So a lot of my students listen to it. A lot of the parents listen to it. So I'd like to throw some scenarios at you now that I have the child development expert on the podcast. So I'm just going to see how a skills instructor would vary their approach compared to a traditional martial arts old school guy like me, I guess. Let's go that way. Okay.
Let's do it.
So let's say a traditional class has 4-year-olds losing focus after 5 minutes. How would a skills trained instructor handle that differently, and what results would parents see?
Okay, think about a child who's 4 years old. A 4-year-old has limited vocabulary. All right, let me frame this for you. I have 4 years of Spanish that I took in high school. But if I was going to go to a Spanish-speaking family, let's say I go to Mexico, and I have dinner with a Mexican family, and they are engaging in a conversation in Spanish, would I be able to keep up with the entire conversation? Most likely not. You know, I would hear the negro pero en la casa, and I'd be like, okay, the black dog went into the house. I would get the gist of what they were saying, but I'm not going to get the whole context.
You just took me out. I'm French up here.
Okay, so French.
So you just totally got, no, I mean, like what you just said, you totally took me out.
Right. Okay. So even like French, you know, right. So my family used to speak French and from Nova Scotia, but the same thing, if you had 4 years of French, but you went into a fluent speaking French household, you wouldn't be able to get the entire context of the conversation. You get the gist. So think about a 4-year-old in America. They speak English. How many years of English does a 4-year-old have? They only have 4 years. So they're getting the context of what you're saying. So for example, if you have a group of kids sitting on the ground like a black belt and you say, Scott, I want you to stand up and demonstrate this kick. And then the other kids see Scott stand up and they look, so then they stand up. And then you look at the other kids and you're like, you're not focused. I said Scott. They got the context of what you were saying. They heard stand up, demonstrate, kick. They saw Scott stand up, so then they stood up. So when a 4-year-old is losing focus, it's not because they don't care or they're in aloof and not very smart. It is their stage of development. So some of the things that we utilize in that particular classroom is, number one, we make sure that we're very brief with the context of the words that we're using. But also, number two, we utilize teaching skills. These are different. So I said there's skills for everything. We utilize a teaching skill called trickery to help them lean into keywords. So for example, I would say, all right, if a 4-year-old's losing focus, I might say, okay, really quickly, a focus check. When I say go, I want everybody to have a seat really fast as they can, legs crossed, hands on their knees like a black belt. But don't let me trick you. Ready? On your marks, get set, banana. On your marks, get set, goose, gopher, go-kart. And here's what happens. Neurons that fire together wire together. So now the 4-year-old is waiting for the keyword go. They're challenged now to want to try to sit down. It triggers dopamine in their brain, and they lean in and try to listen for the word go. Their brain starts to wire in the sense of, I need to listen to what Coach Melody is saying right now so that I hear that key word. And the brain starts to say, when Coach Melody is talking, lean in and listen to those key words. It's not necessarily a deficit in focus. It's that it's on par with their stage of development, and your goal is actually to get them to listen for those keywords. The problem is with 3 and 4-year-olds, our expectations are the same as the goals. So we have expectations with the kids to listen at all times. That should be the goal. The expectation should be at a 4-year-old stage of development that they don't listen because they're just getting the gist of what you're saying. So if you can get them to lean in and listen to those keywords, then you've met your goal.
Awesome. It only took about halfway through the interview before now I got a bunch of parents going, oh, I don't know that when you did that on your market set go for a thing. Now I know exactly where you got it from.
We all do it. We just, it's playful and it's fun. The kids love it. But the science behind it is actually it triggers dopamine in the brain, which is an anticipation of a reward, which is a positive neurotransmitter that makes more neurons fire in your brain, which connects to the synapses in your brain, and it helps brain growth and development. So when you explain it from a science context, the parents now go, okay, this isn't just glorified babysitting. This is somebody who's an expert in science and brain development that is helping my child. And when it comes to that, what parent doesn't want their child to improve their cognitive flexibility and their cognitive load and their cognitive processing in that way?
What's cool is I've had adults in the class, and the adults will react when I say gopher or go-kart.
Oh, yeah. I do it in my seminars all the time. I love it. You know what's even cooler? Because you probably do this, but I would love doing birthday parties with kids in like my early skills program, which is our preschoolers. And I'd have like a handful of my students, but also a handful of kids who are not students. And I'll utilize trickery with intent. And then the parents of the non-students would go, wow, those kids are such good listeners. How are you not tricking them? Because I've wired their brain to be that way. And it's like the easiest sales presentation there is. That's why birthday parties is where I got most of my preschool students, because they watch my existing students and go, how did you do that? And it's the same strategies that we all do. I'm just able to explain it in a scientific way that then they go, oh, okay, now that makes sense.
Next one, temper tantrums. Parents sometimes face meltdowns at home, temper tantrums over small things. How would your methods guide parents through those moments?
First things first, temper tantrums and meltdowns. They're two totally different things, and they come from two different parts of the brain. So we'll start with a temper tantrum. A temper tantrum is when a child or an adult, right? We're victims of that. You have the upstairs part of the brain that controls the temper tantrums. The logical part and the emotional part start to have a disagreement. So let's say the child wants ice cream for dinner, and the emotional part's like, I really want that ice cream. The logical part's like, but we know that we don't get ice cream before we eat dinner. But the emotional part's like, but I'm just going to get really upset because I really want it. And the logical part's going, this is not a good idea. So then all of a sudden they become what's called horizontally disintegrated. The emotional part and the logical part do not agree, and they have a tantrum. And then the minute they get what they want, now all of a sudden they get back, right? Or a tantrum in the martial arts classroom is a student who's highly competitive and they're sparring and they lose a match and they take their headgear off and slam it on the ground. That's a temper tantrum. You know you're not supposed to do it, but you do it anyway because your emotional part says, I don't care what you're saying. Meltdown is totally different. So temper tantrum is the left and the right horizontal part of the brain disintegrated, the left hemisphere and the upstairs part of the brain, the right hemisphere. A meltdown happens when the downstairs part of the brain, the brainstem, which is where the amygdala is, which controls your body's stress response system. That's the downstairs part of the brain and the upstairs part of the brain. A meltdown happens when you become so emotionally overwhelmed that the downstairs part of the brain shuts off the upstairs part of the brain. There's no control. So if you've ever had a moment where you're just overwhelmed in the emotions and you just start crying, or you shut down, and there's no logic in that sense. You know that something has taken over your brain. The way that Dr. Daniel Siegel explains this in the book Whole Brain Child, which, by the way, anybody who's listening to this who really likes all the things that I'm saying and it's resonating, Whole Brain Child is one of the probably the very best book that anybody who works with children, parents, teachers, coaches, grandparents, and so forth should listen to. Dr. Daniel Siegel explains this river of well-being. Imagine a child floating on a boat, or an adult, anybody, a person floating on a boat in the middle of the river. When they're in the middle of the river, everything's cool. But when they lean over to a certain bank where there's not a lot of water and there's rocks exposed, and then the boat starts to hit this rigidity, that's a temper tantrum. But then they go over to the other side of the bank, and that side of the bank is flooding, and they can't control the boat now. Now the boat is out of control. That is more of like a meltdown. So we need to identify first, is this a tantrum or is this a meltdown? If it's a tantrum, what we want to do is we want to get the brain horizontally reintegrated. In a tantrum, we want to say, how can we get the left and the right brain reintegrated so they're communicating again so the boat goes back in the middle of the river? If it's a meltdown, how do we get it vertically integrated so the upstairs part of the brain and the downstairs part of the brain reconnect and they're not flooded and they get back into the middle of the river? So I cover this. I have a 6-week intensive called the Pediatric Ninja Specialist course. It's called PNS. And here's how I explain it. A tantrum. What you would do is go through, I have this, what's called a 4-step process for reintegrating the brain. First thing is recognize the emotion. I see you were upset. You lost that match and you threw your helmet down. That's important. I see you. So now the left part is going, see, she sees you. Coach Melody sees your emotions right now. Second thing is validate. I don't blame you for being upset and losing your match. I'm competitive. I don't like to lose either. As a matter of fact, your competitiveness is your quality. That is what makes you very awesome, is that you hate to lose. So now the logical part is saying, see, not only does she see you being upset, she doesn't blame you. The third step is redirect. But your choice to slam your headgear down when you're upset for losing is not the right choice when you lose. What are some better choices? Now, here's the cool part. That particular student doesn't have to tell you, well, Coach Melody, my choice should be just shake hands and bow and, do all these things. The brain's not there yet. All I'm trying to do is get the left and the right to start to have a conversation. Even if they don't give me the answer, as a matter of fact, 99% of the time, I don't expect them to say, what is the better choice? It's just asking that question to try to get those two parts of the brain to reconnect. So first thing is recognize. Second thing is validate. Third is redirect. And then the fourth part is move it or repair. So in this particular situation, it'd be move it. So I see that you were upset that you lost in sparring. I don't blame you that you lost, but your choice to throw your headgear down is not the right choice. What are some other choices you can make? Okay, you don't know any other choices? Think about it. When you lose, take some deep breaths in. Breathe out like you're blowing out candles on the cake to help re-regulate your emotions. And now what I want you to do is let's get some endorphins going in your body, because right now you're upset. So I want you to pick the exercise. I want you to just go over there before you jump back in line. And I want you to do 10 push-ups, 10 squat jumps, 10 jumping jacks, 10 push-ups, anything to get your heart rate going and get those endorphins back in your brain so you reintegrate. And I use science with the kids. So here's what happens. You recognize their emotions, triggers dopamine, the anticipation of what is she getting at. You validate, which triggers the oxytocin. I'm connecting with the child. Those neurotransmitters start to connect in the brain. You redirect, which gives them serotonin, the satisfaction of, I have choices in my big behaviors when I have tantrums. And then you have them move by going and doing push-ups, which triggers endorphins. So there's still a sense of accountability. If you remember how I said theory X, theory Y. Theory X, hey, Scott, you threw a fit because you lost in sparring. You threw your headgear down, 10 push-ups, and then I want you to step out. Behavior by fear. Lower student morale, not a very high retention rate when those things happen. Kids are going to want to quit, those types of things. Theory Y, I see you're upset. I don't blame you. Your choice to throw your headgear is not the right choice. What are some other choices? Go over there, do some quick exercises. There's accountability there. They're still doing exercises, but they're doing it in a science way, not a threatening way, a behavior by desire. Yes, Coach Melody. All right, I'm going to go do burpees. And then they reintegrate their brain, because the left and the right are now communicating, and you're triggering that dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, and it helps cure the tantrum. Same thing at home. I see that you're upset that you want ice cream. I don't blame you. I love ice cream. My favorite ice cream is chocolate ice cream. But having ice cream prior to eating a healthy, nutritious meal is not very good for your sleep patterns, for your moods. It's not going to help you grow, all of these things. What are some other choices that you can have that we can do as far as you having ice cream? Well, I guess we can have ice cream after dinner. That's a great idea. So what I want you to do now is just really quickly, let's get your body moving. Let's have you come over here, run in place like 10 times, do 10 jumping jacks, something to get those endorphins moving before we have dinner.
One of the things that we do when we get students that have meltdowns where the kid's losing it and their upstairs and their downstairs brain aren't integrated.
Yes.
One of the things we'll do, and again, we stole this from you, we'll start asking them math questions. We'll go, what's 2 + 2? Yep. And it's an automatic reaction. So you're talking about something, there's a 4-stage process now where we got to identify stuff. And so I've got, let's say, a parent who's in a grocery store and the kid is losing it. So they can use their math stuff where now all of a sudden they settle down a little bit so that we can at least have that 4-step conversation. That seems to be our go-to. Is there any other tricks that you can think of that seems to integrate a little bit faster? Sure.
Well, first things first, there's 2 scenarios that you'll see on the internet. You'll see the kid crying in the grocery store and laying on the ground. And there's like one meme where a dad and his grandfather are just standing there and letting him cry it out. And what happens in the brain for that particular child is it takes them longer to re-regulate the brain. When a parent helps them and goes through the 4-step process, yes, it requires a little more work, but what happens is the child learns how to reintegrate their brain faster, which makes that river wider. The more you do it, the more you help them reintegrate their brain, the wider that river becomes, the less likely they're going to go over to the left bank and have that tantrum or that meltdown. So yes, the 4-step process, asking them math questions, and also, again, the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown you can't control. There's another method that you would utilize if it was a meltdown. So first identifying, is this a tantrum? Is this a meltdown? Meltdown is going through what's called the HALT method, HALT. Are they hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? So in many situations, when a child is having a meltdown in the grocery store, it could be that they are hungry and they didn't eat prior to going to the grocery store and they see all this food and they're hungry. Or it could be that they're angry, like a child who comes home and the parent gets in the car and is like, tell me about your day. And they're just angry, like they don't want to talk because they've had so many frustrations that happen throughout the day with the teachers and bullies and so forth. Are they lonely? Are they not connected with you? Are you rushing them out of the house? Hurry up, get your shoes on. We need to go to the store. We have to get this stuff done. And you're showing so much stress that you're not connected to your child that they feel very lonely in that moment. Or are they tired? Did they not get a nap? Did they not get adequate sleep? All of those things are going to affect the child's mood, and those contribute more to meltdowns than tantrums. So as a parent, if I'm in a grocery store and my son were to have a meltdown, the first thing I want to say is, okay, did I bring this on my child? Is he hungry? Is he angry? Was I yelling at him? Was he lonely that I'm not connecting with him? Is he tired? And I want to identify that first, because when I do, I'm going to give more grace to the why and the behavior, and then say, oh, buddy, obviously you're hungry. That's why you're having this meltdown. And even that helps the child feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure, which is another 4-step process. All of these are from Dr. Daniel Siegel. All of them are covered in the Whole Brain Child. But again, there's not necessarily like a secret trick, math problems, box breathing, saying the ABCs forward, then backwards, that is going to fix every single tantrum and meltdown. It's understanding the whys behind the behavior, and particular if your child's having a lot of meltdowns, is being more proactive. To give you a really quick example, my son, when we first got our boat, he never wanted to go on the boat, and he would always have these meltdowns at some point on the boat. And I realized that it was hot. He doesn't like the heat. His body doesn't respond to the heat. And that's kind of falls in that tired part. So he would have these meltdowns. I don't want to stop anywhere. I don't want to go here. I don't want to go there. So we started to become proactive on the boat, where we would bring these cool towels and we'd have extra water that he can splash on his face. And we bring water guns, and we started to curb it and recognize, where does he have the meltdowns and how can we be proactive? If he's having meltdowns in the morning before school, he needs more sleep. My son sometimes has meltdowns when he gets home from school because he's hungry. He hasn't had enough snacks. So I know the first thing before I start quizzing him and grilling him about school is, let me make sure he gets a snack in him first. So all of those things apply as well.
Fall registration season, we've got a run of kids that have come in, and I don't want to label kids exactly, but at the same time, we've got some introverted kids. If there's too many kids on the floor right from the beginning, then they're really scared to get in. And so we can go and have a conversation and say, okay, are you scared? Yeah, I get it. Oh boy, this is really hard. And we can try to encourage them and try to be nurturing and everything. But in the end, they could even turn around and say, yeah, I'm scared, but I don't know why I'm scared. And I don't know why I'm stressed. And I don't know why I'm nervous. So how would you handle that?
Let me break it down from a scientific perspective. Introverts, if you look at an MRI brain scan, this is what I love about really just brain science, even in the last decade, with MRI scans that are able to show where certain parts of the brain light up based on children who are introverts versus extroverts, ADD, autism, and so forth. So an introverted brain has more higher levels of activity in the prefrontal cortex where dopamine is. So if you think of the speedometer on a car, in introverts, dopamine levels are operating at very high levels, especially in group environments. So, for example, when a teacher says, raise your hand if you want to demonstrate this math problem, the introverts are going, I hope the teacher doesn't pick me. Please, if I don't make eye contact, the teacher won't pick me, because their dopamine levels are already at maximum. Extroverts, if you look at their brain on an MRI scan, are actually the exact opposite. Most of the activity starts in the amygdala. So the dopamine is not firing at a high level. So extroverts need that dopamine hit. So again, when a teacher says, who can demonstrate this problem? Introverts are hiding, going, I hope the teacher doesn't pick me. Extroverts are going, please pick me, because they need that dopamine hit. But as society, we do the opposite, right? What do teachers normally do when they say, who can demonstrate the math problem? Are they going to pick the kid who's going, me, or the kid who's hiding? Most times the teacher's going to say, I'm going to pick the child who's hiding because I need to pull them out of their shell. And I'm not going to pick the extrovert because they want too much attention, where we're actually biologically going against what their brain actually needs in that moment. So the same concept in your martial arts class, it would be, who can demonstrate this form? Introverts do not want to demonstrate. Extroverts need that dopamine hit, so they're raising their hands. Most instructors get it wrong, so they try to pull the introvert up. They act shy, they act scared, they don't know why, but it's because their dopamine levels are really high. So one of the examples that we utilize, in, for example, in that particular case, is I say, touch your nose if you know how to demonstrate the form, and then raise your hand if you want to demonstrate it. That way, the introverts are actually actively participating. So now let me just take this to the next level so that we can then go back and unpack your question. Introverts, when they get home from a social situation, for example, my son, he needs to get home. He needs to have a snack. He gets in his comfy clothes. He gets out of his school uniform as fast as he possibly can. And then he has to relax and have some downtime. Usually he jumps on and plays Minecraft, or he's on Roblox or whatever. And he needs to recharge his batteries. His battery is now super low because he's had so much dopamine overload all day with kids and teachers pushing him out of his comfort zone, and him trying to feel like, why am I so overwhelmed in those social situations? Extroverts are the exact opposite. And I know this because my son's bestie, his name is Connor, he gets the zoomies. And when he comes over to our house after school, he wants to jump in the pool. He wants to fish. He wants to play because his brain didn't get enough of that dopamine satisfaction throughout the day. So when you think about it, an introvert who goes into a big social situation, the reason why they don't want to get on the mat is not because there's something wrong with them. It's because their dopamine is overwhelmed now. Now, all of a sudden, the amygdala is saying, this is a lot. I need to assess. I'm a deep well, and I need to feel safe before I can actually tame my dopamine levels and then jump out. And then you have those social people who walk up to anybody and say hello, and they're saying it because they need that dopamine stimulation. So for introverts, and they're shy, they come into the school, I would rather do more of a one-on-one with them. Would you like to jump on the mat and participate with the rest of the group? Or would you like to come over to the side and work with one of my younger junior instructors and maybe do your warm-ups there until you feel comfortable? Now, I know that a lot of traditional martial arts instructors are saying, no, I need to toughen up that kid. Will the Theory X mindset work, saying, hey, nope, if you want to be in my class, you need to jump out? Yes, it will work a small period of time, but at what cost? Will that child eventually not feel safe and quit? Versus, do I give this introvert a little extra space to tame their dopamine, to let them do some warm-ups on the side? Even if you say, hey, listen, for the first 2 minutes of class, I'm going to have you come over here and work with Mr. Scott. You're going to do a couple of exercises, and then you can jump out. Even that tames the dopamine, because what you're doing now is you're giving them expectations that they can wrap their head around. I get some one-on-one time to feel safe, just 2 minutes, helps my dopamine levels just kind of tame, and then I jump into the class. That type of stuff, that's theory Y mindset, that's building behavior by desire versus behavior by fear. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, neurons that fire together, wire together. So if they jump in that experience where I had 2 minutes of safe space with Mr. Scott, I knew only had 2 minutes, but I jumped out there and then I was fine. The neurons start to wire that say this is a safe space versus saying if you don't go out, you don't take class, you don't get your belt, you don't get your stripe. Again, the same goal is to get them to participate in class, but the outcomes are very different at what costs and what does it do to the biology of that child's brain. My son's a huge introvert, and the first few times he played flag football and soccer, he didn't want to go out there at first. I was able to work with him in ways of short, like 2 minute, you go over there, toss the ball around with Connor. I'm going to work with the rest of the team. Then you jump out. And now he's the star player. Now he's the leader. And tonight I'm actually coaching his flag football team because our head coach is out and he wants to call the plays on defense. And he's 10. It shows you the long-term effects of understanding the biological makeup of introvert's brain versus an extrovert. So when a kid is shy, there's not anything wrong with them. It means that they're introvert and their dopamine levels are super high.
So let's say you've got a kid that's on the other end. Now they're running all over the place. They're crazy. Do you reverse everything? You say,
yeah, so they do the opposite. So a child who needs that dopamine hit, I will say, hey, listen, let's have you come over here, work with Mr. Scott, and you're going to do double the warm-ups or double the exercises to boost those endorphins, the exact same thing. I do this with summer camp and after school as well. When kids get off the after school bus, usually it's one structured activity, one size fits all for every single child. And I said, it would help if you said, okay, listen, when you get off the after school bus, if you want to go have some downtime and read or draw or do art, you guys go over there. If you want to come out and play some games and get your zoomies out, you guys come over here. Every single martial arts school that has an after-school program who has heard me say that have implemented, said it's a game changer. And it's only 10 minutes in their structure. It's a game changer because you're working with the biological makeup of the brain. The introverts get to release that dopamine and draw and color and recharge their batteries. The extroverts get the zoomies out and then they go into their structured activities. Because what I say may seem overwhelming for people who are stuck in their own routines and say, yeah, that's not going to work at my school. But we're not talking about half hour here. We're talking about even just 2 minutes. Give it a try and watch what happens.
With that being said, where do you see martial arts instruction being headed in the next 10 years? Like, do you think traditional martial arts schools are going to be in big trouble or?
Well, this is a great question. So I do believe that traditional martial arts schools that have what's considered like a boutique version or like an Ivy League level martial arts business that still integrate the science and psychology, but do it at a much stricter level. Just like, the standards at Harvard are going to be significantly higher than USF, right? But that's a niche market. So I do see traditional martial arts schools surviving as long as they position themselves in that way and say, we have a strict protocol on the students that we accept and the things that we utilize as teaching strategies in our school are going to be rigid and not for the average child. We're talking about maybe 20% of the children in our market. And then you can command higher prices, but you have to find the parents and you have to find the children like myself. I don't mind the rigid. I spent half of my teen years in knuckle push-ups and doing my form over and over and over again when I didn't pass my testings. Like I leaned into that stuff, but not every school can. At the exact same time, when we talk about the next 10 years, let's pull that back. Let's look at the next 2 years. I believe that a lot of jobs, AI is going to take over and replace 60 to 70% of the jobs that are currently available. They're already taking over a lot of jobs. Web development, video editing, AI graphics, all of those things I'm able to do now just with AI technology. Writers, those types of things. Even my friends who are radiologists who are making $200,000 a year, AI is taking over reading MRI scans and x-rays and all of that stuff. So the jobs that are going to be in high demand are human to human connection. Athletic sports, anybody who works with children who have that face-to-face connection that can replace what AI cannot replace. So I see martial arts schools in the next 2-3 years being even more valuable for what they can do for child development, especially because not even AI do we have to worry about taking over human connection roles, especially when it talks about child development. But let's talk about devices. Children now, we have what's called device addiction that, a lot of parents say my child is addicted to devices, but any parent who tries to take their device away from their child without warning are going to get those tantrums or even those meltdowns. So human to human connection is going to be even more valuable for parents, because kids with the devices, look, I'm not anti-device. I believe that games like Roblox and Minecraft have a high level of development for their intelligence and their speed of processing and working memory and all of these things. But too much of it is counterproductive for their brain development, and that's what we're seeing right now. So devices now, you'll read in articles, they give a dopamine overload and a serotonin overload, but they don't have enough oxytocin and endorphins, which are those four chemicals that we say that SKILLZ really builds their curriculum around. So for example, when my son is on his device too long, I say it's time for some social hygiene and some physical hygiene. You need to have socialization in your life, and you need to have physical exercise in your life, just like you have to brush your teeth, just like you have to take your shower. And my son wraps his head around that, and he gets that. So martial arts schools help with that. So when a parent says, well, my child doesn't want to come anymore, he's too busy playing Roblox and Grow Your Garden on his iPhone. Every single time I try to get him to come to class, he throws a tantrum or he has a meltdown. Then you say, well, I understand, because he's getting that dopamine and those serotonin, and that device, Grow Your Garden is great for working memory and speed of processing and even teamwork when he's working with a friend. But what is your game plan for their social hygiene and for their physical hygiene? Because if they don't get that positive social interaction in an environment that is controlled to help them develop emotional intelligence and confidence, and if they don't get that physical hygiene that helps them develop skills that they need, then it's going to lead to isolation, anxiety, depression, mood swings, if you're not keeping them in some type of activity that helps build those particular areas with intent. That's why I get really, really excited about explaining science and psychology when it comes to martial arts, because we're in more of a unique position to help children versus other sports and activities. If you think about it, my son's in soccer. My soccer coach, absolutely amazing, but really his priority is helping my son's team win games. He's not really interested in their social development, their emotional intelligence, those types of things. So in a martial arts school, if we can do that with intent, we provide a value of a service that becomes like an adjunct to therapy. Because if the kid doesn't get enough of the social hygiene and physical hygiene, eventually they're going to have to go see a child therapist because of their depression, their mood swings, and those types of things, which is expensive. I don't know what it's like over in Toronto, but child therapy lessons here are $150 a session. I have a friend whose daughter is in it twice a week. That's $1,200 a month. But he just put her in martial arts at a skill school down the road. And he said that he has seen improvement in her executive functioning and her behavior, that he can start to throttle back on those therapy sessions. So, I can go into a whole nother wormhole into this, but you understand when you say, where do you see martial arts? I'm excited about it because the instructors who are trained in child psychology, in the science, especially from the skills approach, are going to see very bright futures, because they're going to change lives in big ways. And parents, if they have to choose between t-ball, football, soccer, or something that's going to help them become the best version of themselves, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially, the best parents, the ideal parents, are going to be the ones that choose the latter.
You mentioned that pediatric ninja specialist program. Is that exclusive for martial arts instructors, or could anybody?
It's not. I actually have principals and teachers and parents that jump into it. This is the final course that uses martial arts as the example, but I always relate it back at home and I relate it to the schools. Next year, I'm releasing another intensive that's going to be geared towards parents and teachers and so forth. But it's universal, because if I use an analogy from a kid sitting still in class, a parent can relate it to something that they can do at home as well.
Cool. My wife and I, we do another podcast. Basically, again, we talked off air about how all these steps came in place because of COVID. So one of the things that happened during COVID was I went for a radio broadcasting diploma at Seneca College. One of the homework assignments was to create a podcast. So we created a podcast for Uxbridge, which is the town we're located in. And we just interview local people in town and try to connect with the community a little bit more. One of the things we do on the Uxbridge Beat podcast is we do this thing called rapid fire with all our guests. And basically it's just small little quick questions just to get to know them a little bit. And like I said, this is the first time I've ever been able to talk to you face to face. So I thought I'd do the same thing with you. Is that all right?
Sure. But before we do that, I just have to compliment you, because I can tell that you have some type of education, because I do lots of podcasts, and the way that you've even narrated this podcast today is very impressive. You can give a masterclass in how to do podcasts, and I'd be your first student to sign up. But go for your rapid fire.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Okay. Favorite music?
I like reggae, punk rock type of music.
Okay. Favorite band or artist then?
Ooh, I love Citizen Cope, Dirty Heads, 21 Pilots. We're going to Austin City Limits next week, so I'm a big music buff altogether. Jimmy Buffett, I don't know. I'm all over the place.
Favorite film?
Favorite film, The Martian.
Wow. Okay.
Matt Damon, yes.
Okay. Your favorite word?
Passion.
Your least favorite word?
Hate.
Your pet peeve?
Pet peeve, negativity, people who complain.
Your favorite sound?
My favorite sound. Oh, I've never been asked that. I guess I would say the rain.
If you could talk to anyone who has passed away, who would you talk to?
Albert Einstein.
Why is that?
Just because his brain and see how his brain works. He was highly intelligent. He was a critical thinker. And I would just ask him what he did with his downtime, because I know as somebody who throws a lot of cognitive fortitude and cognitive load into what I do, I also have to give my brain a break. So what does he do for brain breaks?
Okay, someone who's alive, and it could be somebody you know or somebody who you don't know that you'd like to know.
This is going to be off script, but I'm a huge Pink fan, the music artist Pink. And I just think that she has a beautiful soul. And I would just love to spend the day with her and just listening to her story, because she's overcome so much adversity. It's not her triumphs that I'd be amazed by. It's how does she carry herself in the middle of the night so that she can show up for who she is during the day?
Cool answer. Okay, if you could talk to yourself, a younger version of you, what would be the biggest piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Mistakes are okay as long as you learn from them.
Nice. If heaven and God exist, what would you want God to say when you pass away?
Well, first thing is I want him to give me a glass of his finest wine, because, God made red wine and I'm a red wine drinker. And I would want him to say, you're not done yet. I would want him to say, now you get to be an angel, and now you get to spend the rest of your soul and spirit shining over people who need you the most.
I stole that question from the Punch Kick Choke Chat guys, but
Very neat.
yeah, we've stolen a few things from them, but we've probably stolen it's obvious we've stolen way more from you.
Stealing and sharing.
Well, it's sharing now because I've stolen it. If someone wants to find out more about skills, how would they do that?
www.skillzworldwide.com, and it's SKILLZ, skillzworldwide.com. Also SKILLZ Worldwide on Instagram and Facebook. There's a lot of resources for parents if they love the narrative and the theories that we talked about today. There's a lot of resources there. If you're a martial arts school, there's lots of different options. There's like an instructor level membership that you can be part of our company. Then there's a foundation level, which is curriculum and all the resources you need to run your early elementary and preschool programs, primarily like your 6 and under programs, which are the foundation of your school. But we also have a licensing membership where you can not only gain access to all of our content, but you can get territory protection too, which means that no other school in your area can utilize our services. It's kind of like a franchise type membership.
Again, thank you so much. This has just been fantastic. I don't have a bucket list, but if this was on it, then I would be so happy to scratch this off. Thank you so much for all your time and all your effort.
Well, I'm honored. Like I said, if you do a masterclass on doing podcasts, let me know. I'll be the first one to sign up.
This has been a Capsule Broadcasting production. If all this makes me sound like an expert, I'm not. I'm just another student trying to figure it all out. Thanks to Melody, I've just learned how to fake being calm a little better on some days than others.